ဒီမှာဒီပကြီးကားကြီးကနော်အဲ့ဒါဘသူပုံလဲသမီးသိလား
သိပါတယ်
ကဲဘသူပုံလဲဖွားဖွားကိုပြောပါအောင်
မြန်မာနိုင်ငံနောက်ဆုံးရှင်ပြည်တီဘောမင်းနဲ့
ဘိုးတော်တီဘောမင်းနဲ့
ဘွားတော်စုဖျားလက်
ဟုတ်ပြီအဲ့တော့ဒီဘိုးတော်နဲ့ဘွားတော်မှာသမီးတော်ဘယ်နှပါးရှိလဲသမီး
၄ပါး
၄ပါးဟုတ်ပြီအဲ့ဒီဟာမှသမီးတော်၄ပါးနဲ့တဖြည်းဖြည်းနဲ့ဖွားတို့ဖိုးတို့နောက်အခုအထိသမီးတို့ဖြစ်လာတာမြန်မာနိုင်ငံရဲ့နောက်ဆုံးရှင်ဘုရင်ကြီးနဲ့နော်ဒီမိဖုရားကြီးဘွားတော်စုဖျားလက်နဲ့အမျိုးတော်တယ်မလားအဲ့လိုတော်လို့ရှိရင်တစ်ချိန်လုံးကမန္တလေး
A long time ago, in a land known as Burma, there lived a line of kings who ruled one of the richest regions in the world for more than 1,000 years. It all came to an end in 1885 with the reign of King Thibaw. This is the story of the last king of Burma, told more than 130 years later through the descendants of his royal blood. As a young 19-year-old, King Thibaw inherited one of the biggest kingdoms in Southeast Asia, that he ruled from the famed Golden Palace in Mandalay. Spread across more than 1,000 acres, the Golden Palace was built to be an impenetrable fortress. An unscalable wall surrounded the palace. It was protected by a deep moat, designed to keep advancing armies at bay. But it was not just earthly invasions the kings were worried about. Astrologers have been predicting the lives of the people of Myanmar for thousands of years. Suyaji's family have been astrologers for 8 generations. His grandfather was the astrologer in residence at King Thibaw's court. Burmese kings were superstitious beings and consulted astrologers on everything concerning life, death, and even architecture. The astrologers advised the king to build watchtowers on the roofs. These were manned 24 hours a day by soldiers scouting for one of the king's biggest foes. Birds of prey were seen as bad omens to the king's reign, and it was imperative to keep them away. But it was not the only prediction the astrologers made for the king. The Golden Palace was built anyway, and King Thibaw was surrounded by teak, gold, and rubies. The most opulent building was 23 stories high and covered in gold. This was considered to be the center of the universe because it housed the king's throne. Yutan Sui is the deputy cultural minister, who is also an historian of all things royal.
This is the lion throne. It's made of gold. The king and the chief queen, they sit on it. Nowadays, if you want to kill the king, you can shoot it. But at that time, you have to go and kill him with a knife. So that's why it's so high that nobody can reach it.
King Thibaw lived the life. He ate in gold plates. He walked in golden shoes, lived in a golden palace, and even spat into a golden spittoon.
Solid gold. Gold slipper, golden fan. Huh? Everything. They only use pure gold. Burmese people believe that the king was the future Buddha. He owns everything, even the life of our people. The king is sacred for them, for the people.
No one was above King Thibaw. He owned every object and every person on the land. He ruled one of the richest kingdoms in the world, so keeping his throne was not going to be easy. Five months after ascending the throne, King Thibaw's ministers ordered more than 80 royal family members to be bludgeoned to death. The massacre lasted for 3 days, executed to the tune of traditional theater. With his family out of the way, there was just one last threat remaining: the British Empire. After 2 wars with the Burmese kingdom, the British Empire controlled large swaths of Lower Burma. And now, they were fighting a propaganda war.
The British people at that time, they enlarged the story, you see. They want Thibaw to be known as a bad king. They even say he's a drunkard, which he don't drink anything.
On the pretense of removing a villainous king from his throne, the British Empire sent its forces to the palace gates. The king hid in his chambers as he watched his palace being looted by his own subjects. It is an image burnt in the memories of the king's descendants. Prince Topia is 93 years old and one of the last 2 remaining grandchildren of King Thibaw.
Some lady in waiting room with that big tub like that. It was pure gold to bathe the babies, the princesses and the princesses. Pure gold. Imagine, man, so big tub. Before Manly Palace, all these hundreds of pillars and all our gold-plated menu. Pure gold leaf stuck, like the pagodas. When the British came in, people used to take a gold away, so about up to where your hand can reach. The pillars are all red, the rest was all gold up there. When we were still young, people used to go to the palace and dig up the dust from the gaps between the 2 boat floors, and they used to get jewels, stones and rubies and diamonds and all that.
On November 29, 1885, British troops entered the sacred royal palace to dethrone King Thibaw. They did so without removing their shoes, unlike any mortals before them. The god on earth, the supreme ruler of the land, and owner of every being, was reduced to the belongings he could carry with him. He was sent into exile in India, never to set foot in his kingdom again. King Thiba of Burma was dethroned by the British Empire on November 29, 1885. He was sent into exile 2,600 kilometers away to a small town on the western coast of India called Ratnagiri.
Ratnagiri was chosen because it was a city of no importance. It was a small fishing village at that time.
Sudha Shah is an author who has meticulously researched King Thiba's exile in India.
I researched the subject for 8 years. This is material that I got translated, articles, books, etc. from Burma. This over here I have lithographs and drawings. Nothing much had been written about the king and queen after their deposition and exile, and I wanted really to know the story. Ratnagiri was not a random selection. It was very, very well selected by the British. There was no road connection. The only way to reach Ratnagiri was by ship, and during the monsoons it was cut off. Remember, King Thiba was a demigod in Burma. There was a reverence of an unbelievable kind. So they wanted him far away and forgotten.
King Thiba's kingdom was reduced to a 22-acre bungalow, built for him on top of a hill overlooking Ratnagiri. It was here that he lived with a plethora of servants, his 2 wives and 4 daughters, under house arrest.
The people of Ratnagiri just loved having King Thiba there. He was like a large corporation because he employed about 160 or 170 people from the town in his large estate. He provided business to grocers, to carpenters. He was like the largest corporation in Ratnagiri. King Thiba had never lived as an ordinary man. He had no concept of how to preserve his money. He was used to giving gifts to anyone who came to visit him. He could never live within his means. He was always in debt. He took loans from everybody he could, including from his own grocer.
110 वर्षापूर्वी बांधलेलं आहे.
Kalahari Gore's family were in constant contact with Thiba, but for a reason.
आणि माझ्या आजे सासऱ्यांनी बांधलेलं आहे घर आहे. ते सावकार होते आणि ते मनी लेंडर होते आणि ते सगळ्यांना असे वस्तू द्यायचे, म्हणजे पैसे द्यायचे. तसे थिबा राजा इथे होता तेव्हा त्यांना पैशांची गरज होती, तर ते यांच्याकडनं घ्यायचे पैसे.
And when the king could not pay his debts, he pawned his royal belongings.
हे लाकडी कपाट आहे. हे पण थिबा राजांनीच माझ्या आजी सासऱ्यांना दिलेलं आहे आणि ह्याच्यावरती हे हस्तिदंताचं एम्बॉसिंग आहे. हे ते त्यांना पैसे देत होते. त्यांच्या मुलांना त्यांनी खूप कपडे दिले होते, जरीच्या टोप्या, गालीचे, अंगातले भरजरीचे कपडे, असं मुंजीत त्यांना खूप दिलं होतं त्यांनी. मुंज माहिती आहे ना?
Faced with a spendthrift king, the British government kept a tight control of Thibault's expenses.
Everything was controlled by the political officer in charge of him. That was, to me, one of the most poignant things, that a man who had once ruled a kingdom at one stage was begging for the government for permission to run his own house.
The king may have been in exile, but he was a celebrity in Ratnagiri. And even his 4 daughters began to get some attention.
See, the princesses didn't have names but titles, and the titles were long, and also they were very similar. So the British found it easier to just refer to them as the first, second, third, and fourth princess. The 4 princesses were pretty much confined to their homes. The king was rejecting every proposal that came their way, saying that none of the people who, were available were good enough. He only wanted people of royal blood.
भरपूर रत्नागिरी दिवस नाही भरत मारले शहर आहे. आता इथे बघण्यासारखं म्हणजे राजवाडा आहे थिबा राजाचा. थिबा पॅलेस बघायचा आहे. हा थिबा रोड, हा इकडे थिबा पॉइंट आहे. इकडे संध्याकाळी सूर्य दर्शन होतं, मावळती सूर्य. थिबा पॅलेस इकडे, थिबा रेस्टॉरंट आहे. परत जो राजा होता ना, तो राजाप्रमाणेच सर्व सण साजरे करायचा. लोकांना कपडे वाटायचा.
राजांना नातं कसं आहे
तुमचं? आमचं थिबा राजा आमच्या आजी आमची आहे, टुटू.
Mangesh Madukar may be a rickshaw driver, but he is also the great-grandson of King Thibault.
हा, त्यांना आश्चर्य वाटतं. ॲटो थिबा राजाचा एवढा राजा असून इकडे आम्ही ॲटो चालवतो म्हणतात. आम्हाला असं अभिमान वाटतो. आम्ही आता थिबा राजाचे वंशज आहे म्हटलं, आम्हाला पण अभिमान वाटतो ना.
इनका रिलेशन नहीं, ऐसा ये रिक्शा का रिलेशन मालूम था, ये रिलेशन नहीं. अभी इनको पकड़ के रखेंगे हम. राजा है.
Descendants like Mangesh exist because of a secret love affair between the first princess and the palace watchman Gopal Shivrakar.
Their confine was the palace grounds. What opportunity did they have to meet people? The people they met were the servants. So the first princess, she did fall in love with the gatekeeper, Gopal. She did have an affair with him. The royal family believed so strongly in the purity of their blood, of their royal blood, that half brothers and sisters married each other to keep the blood pure. So you can imagine what their reaction was when they found that their daughter had an affair with a palace servant. They were beyond horrified. He was already a married man.
After 30 years in exile, King Thibault passed away in his palace in Ratnagiri, heartbroken and forgotten by his own people. The queen and the princesses were allowed to return to Burma. But the first princess decided to come back to Ratnagiri.
I know Princess Faya. I have seen her a lot of times. I have spoken to her.
86-year-old Vijaya Salvi is one of the few people alive to have met the first princess.
Princess Faya, she was a charming lady, hardly 5 feet in height, fair complexion. At that time, we were hardly 8 or 9 years old. We used to go there and play before her house. She used to come and stand in that door. Hey, batta log, idhar aao, take biscuit, take chocolates. And when she sees Shurekar coming on bike with that turban, white turban, she says, "Arey, bhago, bhago, Shurekar aaya, Shurekar aaya." But he didn't care for her. So that is not love, that was lust. That was the attraction, male and female attraction. In that huge palace, nobody knew that she is pregnant.
The first princess gave birth to an illegitimate daughter, who was known in Ratnagiri as Tutu. It is from her that all descendants in India derive their royal lineage.
हयाबद्दल तर मला काय आठवतच नाही. आठवत नाही म्हणजे आम्ही बघितलेली पण नाही. आम्ही तिला त्यांच्याशी खेळलो पण नाही.
72-year-old Chundrakant Pawar is the oldest living grandson of the first princess. He is taking his grandchildren to visit Thibault's palace. Today it stands as a derelict museum.
7 माणसं.
हाँ 21 रुपये.
हां. ओके झाली. इथून हा इथे कारंजा होता पाण्याचा आणि इकडे हा इकडे तबेला होता घोड्यांचा आणि घोड्यांचे इथं सायराचे घोडे इकडून इकडे यायचे इकडून इकडे यायचे आणि त्याच्यावरनं शिवाराजे फिरायला यायचे. हा इथं हॉल होता त्यांचा. ह्या हॉलमध्ये ते असायचे. आता ह्याच्या वरती बाजूला ते त्यांचं गॅलरी आहे. तो सौंदर्य तो त्यांचा तो तिथं हा लावलेला आहे स्टँड. सौंदर्य समुद्राचं बघायचे ते.
आजोबा ही रूम कोणती आहे?
ही थिबा राजा जे होते आणि त्याच्या पुढे ते आणून ठेवणार करणार ते नाही आलंय. पण आता हे राजवाड्याचं एवढंच हे दिसतंय एवढं सामान इथं आहे. हा त्यांचा श्वासन होता. श्वासन म्हणजे आपण ह्याच्यात बसतो ना कोचमध्ये. तुला समजलं काय सांगितलेलं नक्की? हा काय सांगितलं? थिबा राजाचा हे राजवाडा. हा आणि थिबा राजांच्या मुलीचा मी मुलगा है ना. तू ही खापर बनली.
After King Thibault's death, his palace was handed back to the British government, and the first princess moved into a tiny house in Ratnagiri.
The first princess, I think her life in some ways was the most miserable life. In the palace there was her family, but now when she comes into the city as the mistress of somebody, society never accepted her.
No, that is the fate. The prince who lies on golden bed, his daughter or his granddaughter, they are on the road. They are living in a hut.
She died in poverty at the age of 67, abandoned by the man she loved. Two and a half years after the death of King Thibault in India, Queen Supialat and the princesses were allowed to return to Yangon, but without fanfare. 33 years on, Burma was not how they remembered it to be. By now, the country was under the total control of the British colonial government. The monarchy was almost forgotten. Just after a year in Yangon, the first princess returned to her illicit relationship in Ratnagiri. The second princess lived her life in India after marrying a commoner. The third princess remarried in Yangon after a troubled first marriage. The fourth princess stayed by the side of her mother as her favorite child. But 6 years after her return to Burma, Queen Supriyadat passed away. And something strange happened. Thousands of people gathered to pay respect to the Queen. The fourth princess decided to ride the sentiment and take on the British government.
This book is written about the private affairs of the fourth princess.
Devi Sin is an environmentalist and the granddaughter of the fourth princess.
So too, the governments of England, of India, and of Burma.
The fourth princess made a list of all royal property and jewelry that went missing from the Golden Palace and demanded justice.
The first diamond earring and all sorts of diamonds and rubies. Here she noted down. And that time there is no UN, but the League of Nations. So she sent all these private lists and personal treaties to all the countries to give her back the Golden Palace in Mandalay and the personal properties. So the British think she is a rebel princess.
13 years after returning from exile in India, the fourth princess was banished once again to a small town in the south of Burma. The rebel princess had her children taken away from her. They were put into British convent schools and given English names.
She put out a little booklet called Private Affairs of the Fourth Princess, Facts Unknown to the Public. When that came out, the British, they sent it off to Mommy. When we were 7 years old, the government put us in the convents, English code schools. They sort of suppressed us, and we were under surveillance all the time. At least we were not executed. The British were more liberal than the Russians or the French.
Good morning, my mother. Sorry.
At 94 years, Supriyaji is the oldest living descendant of King Thibaut and the daughter of the fourth princess.
My mother always says, don't forget, you are the direct descendant of a king. You always have to be dressed well. You are a royalty. Behave like a royalty. Speak like the royalty. And stay like a royalty. Am I looking beautiful? Am I looking all right?
After independence from British rule, all pensions given to descendants of the king were stopped by the newly formed government of Burma.
We lived in luxury, and all the luxuries came to an end where we had to go out and work for our livelihood. And when vacancies appear in the government departments, I go and apply for a post. When they found out that I was the grandchild of the last Burmese king, they terminated from my post. So what's the use of using the royal name when they don't want to recognize the royalties? I changed my name to a commoner's name, Susukin.
The royals that lived with titles for hundreds of years now live like commoners in Myanmar. Like Susukin's daughter, Devi Kin.
ကလေးကခလေးလေးတွေကားပေါ့နော်ခလေးလေးတွေချတဲ့ကားဒါကကြတော့ဖုန်ကြီးပြန်နေဖုန်ကြီးတွေပြန်ပေါ်မှာ2005ခုနှစ်မှာကိုကျော်သူတို့ညာရေးကိုညီမှုအသင်းမှာအန်တီစချင်းအဲ့ဒီအလုပ်ကစလုပ်တာ volunteer ကိုစလုပ်တယ်ကားမောင်းရတယ်ကားမောင်းပြီးတော့ဒီ dead body ကိုဒီဗုဒ္ဓဘာသာမြန်မာလူမျိုးတွေကလေမြန်မာလူမျိုးတွေကအယူအစွဲလမ်းသိပ်ကြီးတယ်ကားကိုသူတို့နာရေးကားကသူတို့အိမ်ရှိမှာလူများတွေရဲ့ပေါ့နော်အပေါ်စီးကနေပြောတာတွေကိုလည်းအန်တီတို့ခံကြရတယ်အန်တီတို့ကိုလေဟိုပေါ့ဗမာအခေါ်ဆိုသူ့ဘာရာစာခေါ်တာပေါ့နော်ဟိုတိတ်နှိမ့်ကြတဲ့အလုပ်ပေါ့ဒီ body ကဘူးမှဟိုပေါ့အများအမြင်မှာအန်တီဘိုးတော့အသုံးမကျလို့ဒီတိုင်းပြည်ကြီးကနေချက်လက်အောက်ကိုရောက်သွားတယ်လို့ထင်ကြတယ်အဖွာသရုပ်တသမီးတော်အကြောင်းအန်တီ Facebook မှာတင်လိုက်တဲ့အခါမှာအန်တီ comment တွေမှာအစဲခံရတယ်ဘာဖြစ်လို့ဒီဘရင်အသုံးမကျတဲ့ဘရင်အကြောင်းတင်ရတာလဲတဲ့နော်အန်တီရဲ့ဒီမင်းဆွေမင်းမျိုးဆိုတဲ့သွေးတွေကိုဖောက်ထုတ်ပလိုက်ပေါ့နော်ကျမတို့လည်းဘာမှပေးစရာမလိုပါဘူးကျမတို့ဝန်ထမ်းတွေကိုလည်းလေဘာမှပေးစရာမလိုပါဘူးရှင့်
ဟုတ်ကဲ့ပါအခုလိုကျေးဇူးတင်ကျေးဇူးတင်အများကြီးတင်ပါတယ်
ဟုတ်ကဲ့ပါနော်အဲ့ဒီအတွက်လည်းအန်တီစိတ်မကောင်းဘူးဘာဖြစ်လို့လဲဆိုတော့တခြားတိုင်းပြည်တွေမှာဟိုဒီဘရင်နဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ပေါ့နော်ဘိုးတော်ဘွားတော်တွေနဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့နောက်ဆုံးဆွေတော်မျိုးတော်ကြံခဲ့တဲ့ဆွေတော်မျိုးတော်တွေကိုလည်းတိုင်းပြည်ရဲ့လူမျိုးတွေကချစ်ကြတယ်ခင်ကြတယ်ကောင်းတာတွေအန်တီဘိုးတော်ကကောင်းတာတွေလည်းလုပ်မယ်မကောင်းတာတွေလည်းလုပ်မယ်အန်တီလုပ်ပေးနိုင်တာအန်တီအကောင်းဆုံးအန်တီဘိုးတော်ဘွားတော်တွေအတွက်အန်တီကပြန်ပေးဆက်နေတာ
The kings of yore have not been completely forgotten in Myanmar. Most young men in the country become monks at least once in their lives. Even to this day at the Shinbu ceremony, a young man is escorted to the monastery by relatives and family members dressed as royalty. This is a testament to the king's contribution to religion and culture in the country. Even in the capital city of Naypyidaw, the royal influence is clearly visible.
Naypyidaw means the royal city. Daw means royals. That's why we named this town as Naypyidaw.
The government of Myanmar has retained one of the most important symbols of power of the erstwhile kings.
How you have to eat with all these cold plates.
The white elephant.
For a Myanmar king is a symbol of political power, prestige, and prosperity for the country. if the king possessed a white elephant, that means he is more powerful. He believes like that. So if we don't have any white elephants, we ask for the other countries to give us. But if they don't give, we fight each other.
The appearance of these strange creatures of myth and legend were considered to be nature's confirmation of a king's greatness. Today, the government protects and venerates them as good omens for building a modern nation.
It's good for us. Pure white elephant.
In Ratnagiri, there has been a renewed interest in the fate of the last king of Burma. In 2012, the Burmese government finally took interest in the king's whereabouts and sent a delegation to Ratnagiri.
हे राष्ट्रपती राजे आले होते विमानाने. त्यांना मिलिटरीचा गार्ड होतो, पोलीस गार्ड होतो. ते रत्नागिरीत फक्त थिबा पॅलेसमध्ये काय आहे आले, बसले, थोडंसं कोणाची मिटिंग काही घेतली नाही, कोणाला बोलले नाही आणि त्यांनी फक्त आम्हाला बोलवलं, आमच्या हातात हात दिला, आम्हाला हार गुच्छा दिला, काय बोलले नाही, काही बोलले नाही, नमस्कार केला. आणि गोवा गव्हर्नमेंटने यांनी काहीच दिली नाही. ब्रह्मदेशनी तुम्हाला पेन्शन चालू करतो म्हणून सांगितलं होतं, परत काही नाही. हे देखो ये डॉलर दिया, झराप निकाल कर ठेवून दिले डुप्लिकेट.
The delegation took interest in the king, but left him behind in Ratnagiri. The tombs of the king, the minor queen, and the first princess remain in India.
हे सगळं जंगल होतं, ह्याला कलर बी नव्हता. लोक गुरं बांधायची, झोपडपट्टीवाले झोपड्या बांधून राहायचे, तिच्यावर कोण चौकशी करायची नाहीत. आणि त्यांना जेव्हा आठवण येईल किंवा कोणतरी येणार आहे असं म्हटलं की ते काढणार सगळं आणि साफसफाई करणार. हे बिल्डिंगी बांधल्या आहेत, त्यांच्या समोर सगळ्या मुताऱ्या संडास ते ठेवले आहेत. मी त्याच्याबद्दल आणि त्यांना म्हटलं हे सगळं बंद करा. थिबा राजाचा बोर्ड रोडवर मोठ्या ह्याच्यात लावा. तो त्यांनी आता एवढासा पत्र्यावर लावलाय, पत्रा केलाय आणि पत्र्याचा लावलाय. बा रोडवर अशी गार्ड करा आणि त्याचे लावा. त्यांनी मला उत्तर पण दिला नाही आणि काय कळवलं बी नाही. मग आमची आई यायची ना, ती कुठे पेढे, चणे, शेंगदाणे अशा आणून इथं ठेवायची आणि मग ती जायची फिरायला यायची ना इकडे. नाही भाऊ घर में करता होता, ताटात भरून ती आणि घरी करायची आणि इकडे आणून आम्हाला म्हणायची चला जाऊया तिकडे थडक्यात. हा पूर्वी बोर्ड लावला होता ना, तो असा उलटा लावला होता. आणि जेव्हा हे राजे आले तेव्हा त्यांच्या त्या लोकांच्या निदर्शनास आला हा बोर्ड उलटा आहे. मग असा उलटाचा सरळ केला. नाही मला काय माहीत नाही तिथलं काय लिहिलं आहे आणि त्यांची भाषा आम्हाला काही येत नाही आणि त्यांच्या भाषेत काय लिहिलं आहे ते काय माहीत नाही. याच्यात राणीची हस्ती ठेवायची होती एवढं माहीत होतं, ते ठेवलेलं नाही. हे बोगदा असा खाली आजपर्यंत मोकळा आहे. त्यानं हे केलं, अग्नी दिली होती आणि ती हस्ती त्यांनी पेटा भरून आपल्या कलेक्टरच्या बंदोबस्ताखाली ठेवलं होतं. पण त्यानंतर आम्ही ज्यांना विचारलं ते आम्हालाच सांगायला लागले तुम्ही नेलीत. म्हटलं आम्ही कशाला नेणार, आम्हाला काय.
Even to this day, the whereabouts of the ashes of the first princess are unknown. But the other princesses have made it back to Myanmar.
So this is my great-great-grandmother, Queen Supyala tomb. So that peacock is our royal family logo. Only royal family can use this logo. So this tomb is the second princess. She died in India. Most of the Burmese people even don't know the second princess tomb is here. My goodness. You see all the dogs around here. So, who's look after that? Nobody. This place is a lot of memory for me. I'm very sorry to see all these tombs because my great-grandmother, Queen Supyala, her tomb is in Myanmar, and my great-grandfather, the last king of Tibor, is in India, Ratnagiri. It's not the right place to have. The king must be in the right place for his country. Maybe one day they will be all together in Mandalay Palace.
तिकडे म्हणतात मोठा राजा होता तो, एकदम डॅशिंग राजा होता. आम्हाला पण बघायचं आहे. शिवराजाचे अजून तिकडे वंशज आहेत, त्यांना भेटायचं आहे तिकडे जाऊन. त्यांचं लय एकदम चांगलं आहे म्हणतात. मागे ऑस्ट्रेलियाची मॅडम आली ती, अरे ती म्हणते, ते म्हणतात तिकडे सोन्याच्या ताटात जेवतात आणि तुम्ही इकडे साधे कसे काय. आम्ही म्हटलं आमचं गव्हर्नमेंट बरोबर नाही, त्यांचं गव्हर्नमेंट चांगलं आहे.
इकडे काही नाही, अजिबात काही नाही. आता या थडग्यातलं लोक त्यांच्या बंगल्यातलं लोकांनी नेलं, पण शिवाराजाच्या नातीनं आणलं नाही त्यातलं. आमच्याकडं काय राजाबद्दल बा हा राजाचा पंतू, बा मी राजाचा पंतू आहे, शिवाराजे हे आमचे आहेत.
टीटू आजी के बच्चे है ना, अभी नोटिस निकला था, इधर से भी निकलने का था. ज्यादा कुछ नहीं, पैलेस विलेस नहीं चाहिए हमको. हमको क्या करने का लेके, थोड़ा सा जमीन चाहिए रहने के लिए, बच्चों लोगों के लिए.
Kenapa? Anh đi bố rồi bỏ rồi thì con là lâu khe ta lúa, anh lưu cho nên nhà lâu khe đấy, con này bây giờ thì sau đấy cháu này trẻ đấy, con nào thì nhà lâu khe đấy, con nào thì lưu đi mà nhìn này, mà con nào cha rồi nhìn cha bị rồi, ai lưu anh đi bố rồi bỏ rồi thì nhớ là sẽ khăn nhà đấy.
You see, in our Buddhist religion, we believe in fate. That is our luck. It has to be. It has to be. The good days have ended. That is, our luck has vanished. That is how we accept our life.